of companies have found all sorts of value in it. But I think there's another kind of value, which is more the traditional journalistic value.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Hockenberry, and I'm going to talk to you today about source map. But first, I'd like to look at how we see problems with supply chains in the world. We get these little snapshots. Every so often, you hear a story about lead contamination, you hear a story about a Tylenol recall, and these are supply chain problems. These are problems where Tylenol is sitting in a crate that's leaching into the material. And you have to ask yourself, why are we hearing these stories only so often? We're buying more and more things every day. When the crates are leaching into Tylenol, what else was sitting in those crates? These are really complicated problems that affect pretty much every product we buy. And it doesn't really make sense, because we don't actually know where things come from anymore. And where things come from is pretty much a fundamental part of the human experience. If we go back as far as we can, we find that where something comes from is strongly identified with it. These are wine jugs found in Pompeii that have what's thought of as the world's first brand name, which is Vesuvinum, literally wine from Vesuvius. So the association of where something comes from and where it is so strong that I'm sure if you think about it, you can all think of a product and a country that literally have the same name, China. And this is true for a lot of things in the history of humankind. The association of where they come from is a fundamental part of what that means. I'd like to tell you a story about a problem in a supply chain, the story of ivory. So a growing middle class increased the need for ivory to fuel their consumptive practice. It seemed like there were lots of elephants, there was lots of ivory, lots of people were buying ivory. The problem was, no one really knew where ivory was coming from. They knew with a shallow understanding that it was coming from Africa, but the consumers didn't know what that meant. The companies who were funding the import of ivory didn't know what that meant. The only people who knew what that meant were the hunters who were gathering massive amounts of ivory. Until one day, the hunters discovered it was getting harder and harder to find elephants. And because this wasn't communicated, we got to this point where we were almost out of ivory, which means, if you're following along, we were almost out of elephants. So communication and information in supply chains, in the things that we buy, the things that we use to build our world, is a fundamental thing for how we're going to build our civilization. And this is not a history lesson. This is not a historic problem. This is a problem that continued into the 80s until 1989 when the US finally banned the import of ivory, although it still goes on. And it's a problem that was discovered in 2008 to have long-term impacts for elephants, where a study in 2008 suggests that elephants now have shorter tusks than they ever have historically, and will probably continue to have them because of the impact of the ivory trade. So what's the solution to this problem? It's actually not a hard solution. We thought about it a little bit, and we decided that we should just know where things come from. And because of this, because of the one-day click, the idea that something's going to get to us tomorrow, we need to understand what that means. Where things come from, not just in terms of made in the USA, made in Italy. We need to understand all the goods, all the people involved in that production. So we made SourceMap, simple mapping tool to start sharing this information. And this is not sort of just the information about the physical location of where it comes from, but actually what that means, all the way down to things like understanding the bananas, how they're harvested before they're shipped here for us to eat. And what we want people to do with that information is to take it and recontextualize it and tell interesting stories, uncover interesting problems, use the understanding of where something comes from to actually be able to make a real impact in the world by analyzing environmental, social impacts. To do things like this, which put it into perspective for consumers, what they're actually buying and what that actually means in their life and in the life of the world. This is a logistical imperative. There are serious problems at the root of every consumer product that we buy. I'm going to start by talking about artisanal mining. I myself am the son of a coal miner. I know that the practice of going underground to bring up the riches of the earth is a difficult, backbreaking practice. But it's made more so when it's done in conditions like this. This is a tin mine in Bangka Island in Indonesia. If you have a laptop in front of you, congratulations. You're the owner of a product produced at a mine quite like this one. This is mining in the Congo. Again, the people who are doing this are desperate. This is the only, or perceived to be the only, opportunity that they have. And yet this is fundamentally vital to every consumer electronic, this kind of mining process. The other side of artisanal mining are the conditions of the countries that the mining occurs in. What you think of when you hear conflict diamonds and conflict materials. This is a visualization of Africa's coltan trade. Again, if you're the owner of a consumer electronic, you should look at this. If you own any of the products by Nintendo, Apple, HP, Sony, this has impacted the purchase you made. This has impacted the thing you own. And yet we don't know that. Any place you go, there's going to be a social problem. The one you might have been hearing about recently are the suicides related to the iPhone and the production ongoing in China. I don't want these all to be sad stories. The story of connecting with the human elements of the supply chain should be one about connection and everything that means. Sometimes there are difficult problems in that connection. Sometimes we see real people at the end of a supply chain. A journalist in the UK received an iPhone which had pictures that were taken on it by the actual worker who produced it. This is not a sad story. This is a story about human connection and the fact that when we buy things, we're receiving the gifts of a worldwide supply chain that we should appreciate and really think about. And for those of you who are working in the web and say, well, you know, I'm off the grid, I don't really like buying things, I'm an anti-consumerist, supply chains are digital too, right? When things like the .ly domain are affected by the government that actually controls that domain, there's a digital supply chain there with digital social implications. So I want us to expand our sense of what logistics means to include physical and digital things. The solution to this, in my opinion, is SourceMap, which is a tool, a methodology for understanding global materials and where they come from. I've showed SourceMap in the past. Basically, it's a web system, an open community, open platform, open source, that allows people to create and enter supply chains. Those people could be academics. Those people could be journalists. This is the site. You can go to it at sourcemap.org. I want to just cover very briefly the field work that we've engaged in, some of which you've heard of. We've tried to work closely with governments, academic organizations, journalists. We've worked with a butcher who wants to help communicate to his customers where their meat comes from. We've worked with a brewer who wants to change the face of her local industry by moving the bottling plant miles north and keeping it completely local. We've worked with a hotel owner who wants her customers to be able to appreciate the natural beauty for years to come of her hotel right outside of Loch Ness. We've worked with Sussex. We did a collaboration with the University of Montana Journalism School to help students there understand the grain drain problems facing Montana, where Montana is able to grow and produce lots of foodstuffs, but unable to actually process them into finished food because all those jobs have shifted elsewhere. So these are not just environmental problems, these are not just material problems, these are community problems. These are some of the maps that they produced. Even what you think of as global brand products like the Sony water have very real local community impacts and touch very small regions. I'd like to spend the last little bit of my talk here just showing you some of the great maps that people have made with our tool, which I encourage all of you, if you have a product, understand how it's made, put it up here. Just want to mention that New York University and Parsons, we've had some academic collaborations which have been great. We've had things like the typical laptop computer, an iPod, a local food product, one of the biggest planes in the world, a bomb. This is a bomb that someone has mapped that's used for blasting oil wells. A landfill. If you live in Manhattan, lower Manhattan, this is your landfill. This is where your stuff goes. You can see the animal carcasses are collected. We've had people map conferences which they haven't attended to understand the carbon impact of not flying. And we've had people map the carbon impact of meetings that they've actually attended. We have big name products, Ragu and Domino's, Kia. We have comparisons between different kinds of laundry detergent. We have where Uggs come from. And we have large-scale construction projects, like an entire sustainable material remodel of a house. And sometimes these go to incredible levels and incredible details. So I'd just like to conclude very quickly by comparing us to this creature, the Bermuda hermit crab. And I don't want us to end up like this creature, because you see the Bermuda hermit crab has this interesting problem. Its shells come from this species of snail. The only problem is that species of snail went extinct 100 years ago. So slowly, as those shells break down, this creature goes extinct because the materials for which its survival depends